Let me get that for you. 5.80 won't break me.
It might cost you more than you think.
When a wealthy white CEO paid for a black woman's declined coffee card, he never expected that same woman to destroy his $400 million empire 6 months later. What happened in the next 60 minutes didn't just expose his systematic racism. It triggered the largest corporate fraud investigation in the industry and created a $230 million empire built by the very people he had discriminated against. Jasmine Taylor had been planning this moment for exactly 183 days, but nobody knew the quiet former strategy director was actually gathering evidence that would prove Daniel Morrison had been stealing ideas, falsifying government contracts, and systematically firing talented minorities for years. "Card declined again, ma'am. Do you have another card?" The coffee shop cashier repeated with growing impatience, ignoring the line forming behind Jasmine Taylor at the bustling Manhattan Starbucks on East 42nd Street. She felt the heat rise in her neck. It wasn't embarrassment, it was controlled anger. At 35, Jasmine had learned that moments like this revealed more about others than they did about herself. The corporate card had been cancelled exactly 6 months ago, obviously, but she kept her personal account strictly organized. "Try this one," she said calmly, handing over another card. Also declined. The young man behind her snorted, clearly annoyed. That's when a familiar voice cut through the air behind her like a knife. "Hey, cashier, just put her coffee on my tab." Jasmine turned slowly. Daniel Morrison. Perfectly parted grey hair, a navy Armani suit that cost more than some people's 3-month salary, and that condescending smile she knew so well. The same man who 6 months ago had said in front of the entire board, "Jasmine, sweetheart, you know we love your unique perspective here, but maybe it's time for you to seek opportunities that better align with your cultural background." The same Daniel who had invented a non-existent restructuring to fire her from Morrison Enterprises, the company she had helped double in size in 4 years as director of strategy. "No, thank you," Jasmine replied, her voice polite but icy. "Oh, come on, everyone's been there, it's just coffee." Daniel laughed, holding his Apple Watch up to the payment reader. $5, 80 won't break me." The payment was approved instantly. Jasmine accepted the coffee with a whispered thank you, watching Daniel walk away toward the executive tables without even looking back. To him, she was just another person in need of charity. A story to tell at dinner about how generous he had been to a person in need that morning. He had no idea who she really was, or rather, who she was becoming. As she walked toward the exit, Jasmine felt the weight of the envelope in her purse. The investor signatures were there, along with the contracts that would change everything. 6 months of meticulous planning, secret meetings, building something Daniel could never imagine. She stopped at the door and looked back one last time. Daniel was sitting alone, typing furiously on his cell phone, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to hit his life. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known your true worth, then you know that the best revenge isn't served hot, it's served cold, calculated, and at the perfect moment. Subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple $5, $80 a coffee would become the catalyst for the most spectacular downfall the corporate world has ever witnessed. 6 months earlier, Jasmine had walked into that same Morrison Enterprises meeting room carrying the proposal that would save the company from bankruptcy. 42 slides of pure strategic genius, the result of sleepless nights analyzing data that no one else had been able to decipher. "Gentlemen," she had said, adjusting her glasses as she connected her laptop to the projector, "our numbers show that we can not only survive the crisis, but double our profit margin in 18 months. The silence in the room was palpable. Daniel Morrison sat at the head of the mahogany table, playing with a $15,000 Montblanc pen he had inherited from his father. Next to him were 5 other white executives in identical suits, all heirs to family fortunes. "Interesting perspective, Jasmine," Daniel had said, without even looking at the screen. "But don't you think you're, how can I put this, overestimating our ability to change? This company has traditions that go back 4 generations. Traditions. The word he always used when he meant, we don't want people like you making important decisions here." Jasmine had ignored the veiled insult and continued. For 2 hours, she presented irrefutable figures, projections based on market analyses that had taken months to compile, strategies that would revolutionize not only Morrison, but the entire industry. At the end, the applause was polite, lukewarm. "Thank you, Jasmine. We'll consider your suggestions," Daniel had lied with that patronizing smile she knew so well. 3 weeks later, Morrison Enterprises publicly announced a revolutionary expansion strategy. Word for word, Jasmine's proposal, presented by Daniel as if it were his own creation. The company's profits tripled in 6 months. Jasmine didn't even get a thank you, and when she dared to question it, Daniel called her into his office. "Look, Jasmine, you're very intense," he had said, leaning back in his Italian leather chair. "Maybe it's time for you to look for something more suited to your profile. I'm sure there are NGOs that would love to have someone with your dedication." NGOs, as if she were some kind of well-intentioned volunteer instead of the most brilliant strategic mind the company had ever had. Now walking through the streets of Manhattan with the coffee Daniel had generously paid for, Jasmine smiled for the first time in months. Not a smile of gratitude, but one of anticipation. The envelope in her purse contained more than investor signatures. It contained the birth certificate of Genesis Capital, a strategic consulting firm she had built in absolute secrecy over the past 6 months. But what they didn't realize was that Jasmine had been building something Daniel could never imagine. The envelope in her purse contained more than investor signatures. It contained the birth certificate of Genesis Capital, a strategic consulting firm she had built in absolute secrecy over the past 6 months. 15 former Morrison employees had already signed contracts with her. Not just any employees, the best talent Daniel had fired or ignored over the years for being different. Brilliant women, Black and Latino professionals he considered out of step with the company culture. Each of them harbored resentment, each of them had inside information, and each of them was hungry for justice. But best of all, Daniel had no idea. To him, Jasmine was just a problematic former employee who had understood her place and quietly disappeared. What an arrogant fool. Her phone vibrated. A message from Marcus Chen, Morrison's former IT director, whom Daniel had fired for cultural fit issues, translation, for being a first-generation Asian American who spoke fluent Mandarin and had too many foreign ideas. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow. I brought a special gift, all the backups of Morrison's internal emails from the last 5 years, including the conversations Daniel thought he had deleted. Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Daniel Morrison had made the classic mistake of powerful men. He had completely underestimated the woman he had humiliated. What he didn't know was that every veiled insult, every stolen opportunity, every condescending smile had been carefully catalogued in her memory. And now every injustice would become fuel for the destruction machine she had built, with the surgical precision of someone who understands that the best revenge isn't served hot, it's served cold, calculated, and at the moment when your enemy feels most secure and invincible. 24 hours after Daniel's charity coffee, Jasmine was sitting in the boardroom on the 23rd floor of an inconspicuous building in the financial district. Around the oval table were 15 professionals representing the most talented and underrated minds in the American corporate market. Marcus Chen connected his laptop to the projector and smiled with malicious satisfaction. "Guys, you're going to love this." The screen lit up with a cascade of internal emails from Morrison Enterprises. Not just ordinary emails, correspondence that Daniel thought he had permanently deleted, including private conversations between him and other executives about employee cultural fit. "This one's my favorite," Marcus said, clicking on a message from 2 years ago. "We need to find a subtle way to clean house. Too much diversity is affecting our traditional dynamic, especially that Jasmine, too assertive for a woman in her position." A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. Patricia Martinez, a former marketing director who had been reorganized out of the company after questioning pay disparities, clenched her fists. "There's more," Marcus continued, opening another file. Here he discusses specifically how to appropriate Jasmine's ideas. "Her strategy is brilliant, but we can't let someone, let's say non-traditional, take credit for saving the company. I'll present it as my own." Jasmine remained calm, but her eyes shone with an intensity that made some colleagues realize they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple business meeting. "Wait until you hear what they found about the government contracts." Jasmine remained calm, but her eyes shone with an intensity that made some colleagues realize They were witnessing something much bigger than a simple business meeting. "This is just the appetizer," she said calmly. "Marcus, show them what we found about the government contracts." The next revelation was devastating. Daniel had systematically lied on bids for federal contracts, inflating diversity numbers at the company by using contract and temporary employees to mask the reality that 92% of Morrison's leadership was white men from privileged families. "Federal fraud," whispered David Park, a former legal counsel. "That could result in jail time." "It can and it will," Jasmine replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But first, let's play a little game." She stood up and walked to the window, watching the movement of the streets below. "Do you know what the dumbest mistake Daniel made yesterday?" Everyone looked at her curiously. "He paid me for a 5.80 cup of coffee." She laughed softly. "A man who stole my idea, who made millions off my work, who fired me out of pure prejudice, thought he was being generous by paying for my coffee." Patricia shook her head in disbelief. "This man's audacity knows no bounds." "Exactly. And that audacity is exactly what will destroy him." Jasmine returned to the table and opened a folder with documents. "Because while he thinks he's in control, we're here planning how to dismantle his life piece by piece." She distributed contracts to those present. "Genesis Capital officially exists as of today. Our first client? Morrison Enterprises itself." "What do you mean?" asked Marcus, confused. "I got an email this morning." Jasmine connected her phone to the projector. "Daniel, in his infinite arrogance, has decided he needs outside consulting to optimize corporate efficiency after last quarter's numbers started to slip." The message was from Amanda Foster, Morrison's executive secretary, and Jasmine's former colleague who had been keeping in touch secretly over the past few months. "Mr. Morrison would like to know if you know of any discreet and competent consulting firms. He mentioned that he had an inspiring conversation yesterday with a young female entrepreneur and is rethinking how the company can help emerging talent." The silence in the room was deafening. "He has no idea who I am," Jasmine continued, her voice heavy with irony. "To him, I'm just a struggling black person he helped out of the goodness of his heart. Now he wants to hire a company to solve the problems he created without realizing the company is me." David Park couldn't contain his laughter. "That's genius. He's literally going to pay you to destroy him." "Even better." Jasmine opened another folder. "Amanda gave me the list of clients Morrison has lost in the last 6 months. Coincidentally, they've all decided to outsource their strategic consulting services." Marcus understood immediately. "You're already sabotaging the company from the inside." "It's not sabotage when you offer a better service," Jasmine corrected with a smile. "It's pure capitalism." Patricia leafed through the documents, impressed. "Jasmine, this represents at least 40 million in lost contracts. $52 million to be exact. And that's just the beginning." Jasmine sat back down. "Because tomorrow afternoon, Genesis Capital will present a proposal to Morrison Enterprises to solve their efficiency and modernization problems." "And what's the plan?" asked David. "Simple. We're going to do exactly what Daniel has always done. We're going to use his ideas against him. 52 million to be exact. And that's just the beginning." Jasmine sat back down. "Because tomorrow afternoon, Genesis Capital will present a proposal to Morrison Enterprises to solve their efficiency and modernization problems." "And what's the plan?" asked David. "Simple. We're going to do exactly what Daniel has always done. We're going to use his ideas against him." Jasmine opened her laptop and showed a flawless presentation. "For 6 months, Amanda has been feeding me all the company's internal strategies. Every plan, every decision, every move Daniel considers genius." "And you're going to present them as if they were yours?" asked Patricia. "No," Jasmine shook her head. "I'm going to present solutions that expose exactly how all his decisions are leading the company to bankruptcy. I'm going to prove with irrefutable data that he's incompetent and only got where he is through privilege and luck." Marcus leaned back in his chair, impressed. "And he's going to pay you to humiliate him publicly, in front of the entire board of directors, in front of investors, in front of the trade media he himself will invite, to show how he's innovating by hiring outside consultants." Jasmine's phone vibrated. A message from Amanda. "Meeting confirmed for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Mr. Morrison wants the entire board present. He said it will be a milestone in the company's history." Jasmine showed the message to everyone, and the smile that spread across the room was one of pure anticipation. A milestone indeed, she said quietly. Just not the way he thinks. While her colleagues discussed the final details of the operation, Jasmine looked out the window once more. Daniel was probably congratulating himself on his good deed from the day before, unaware that he had just accelerated his own destruction. Because what men like Daniel Morrison never understood was that underestimating a brilliant black woman wasn't just prejudice, it was professional suicide. And tomorrow, in a boardroom full of people who had always doubted her potential, Jasmine would finally show them the true meaning of the word adequate. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether Daniel would survive what was coming. It was whether there would be anything left of his career after the storm passed. If you believe that brilliant black women deserve respect in corporate America, type respect below. As the team finalized their strategy, each piece of evidence was carefully organized. Marcus had compiled not just the discriminatory emails, but also recorded phone conversations where Daniel discussed cleaning house of diverse employees. Patricia had documented every instance of pay disparity and promotion bias. David had prepared the legal framework, showing how Daniel's diversity fraud violated multiple federal regulations. Remember, Jasmine addressed the group, tomorrow isn't about revenge in the petty sense, it's about justice. It's about proving that competence, not privilege, should determine success. Every person in that room who doubted us, who dismissed us, who thought we weren't good enough, they're about to see what we're really capable of. The room fell silent as the weight of the moment settled in. 15 professionals who had been systematically pushed out of corporate America were about to prove that the system had discarded its greatest assets. One more thing, Jasmine added with a slight smile. Daniel specifically requested that I attend the presentation. He wants to inspire the young entrepreneur he helped yesterday by showing her how real business is conducted. The irony was perfect. Daniel Morrison, in his infinite arrogance, had personally invited his own destruction into the building. 3-2 sharp. Jasmine entered the Morrison Enterprises boardroom, carrying a leather briefcase and a smile that revealed absolutely nothing of the hurricane that was about to descend upon that place. What came next would shock the entire board of directors, investors and trade media Daniel himself had invited to witness his innovation. 3 Mac sharp. Jasmine entered the Morrison Enterprises boardroom, carrying a leather briefcase and a smile that revealed absolutely nothing of the hurricane that was about to descend upon that place. Daniel sat at the head of the table, beaming with satisfaction. At his side were 12 company executives and 3 business journalists whom he had personally invited to document his innovation in corporate management. Hey everyone, I'd like to introduce Jasmine Santos, CEO of Genesis Capital, Daniel announced with his chest puffed out. Her talented young entrepreneur whom I had the pleasure of meeting yesterday and who will help us revolutionize our operational efficiency. Jasmine nodded politely and connected her laptop to the projector. Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here to solve Morrison Enterprises' problems. Solve problems? Daniel laughed. Well, maybe that's a strong word. Let's say optimize. No, Daniel. Solve problems, Jasmine clicked on the first slide, because after analyzing your internal data, I can say with absolute certainty that this company is less than 6 months away from total bankruptcy. Daniel's smile froze. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Let's start with the basics, Jasmine continued, her voice calm and professional. In the last 18 months, Morrison has lost $52 million in contracts that were considered guaranteed. Would anyone here be able to explain why? Total silence. No? Then let me clarify. She clicked to the next slide, showing an audio recording. This is a recorded conversation between Mr. Morrison and a potential client 4 months ago. Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers. Look, between us, we know that our team doesn't have the same diversity as other companies, but that means we have less drama and more focus on the job at hand. Daniel paled. How did you get this recording? Oh, Daniel, did you really think you could fire 15 talented people without any of them keeping evidence of the real reasons? Jasmine smiled coldly. Next question. Does anyone here know why major corporate clients canceled contracts in the same week? One of the journalists began taking notes furiously. Jasmine clicked again. The screen showed a series of internal emails with the prejudiced messages Marcus had recovered. We need to find a subtle way to clean up the department. Too much diversity is affecting our traditional dynamics. She read aloud. This email was sent by Mr. Morrison to the entire board 2 years ago. "That's been taken out of context," Daniel shouted, jumping up from his chair. "Has it?" Jasmine remained unperturbed. "Then let's look at the full context." What followed was a devastating 20-minute presentation. Discriminatory emails, recordings of meetings where Daniel made racist comments, forged documents for government contracts, and most humiliating of all, proof that he had systematically stolen ideas from employees he later fired. "And here we come to the crux of the matter," Jasmine said, showing the strategic proposal she had created 2 years earlier. This strategy that saved the company and earned Mr. Morrison a $5 million bonus was created entirely by an employee he fired 3 weeks later for cultural fit issues. Daniel was visibly sweating now. Who are you?" Jasmine finally smiled. It was a smile that carried 2 years of humiliation, 6 months of meticulous planning, and the sweet taste of justice finally being served. The story gets even more devastating when you realize what Daniel had been hiding about his own identity theft. Jasmine finally smiled. It was a smile that carried 2 years of humiliation, 6 months of meticulous planning, and the sweet taste of justice finally being served. "I am Jasmine Taylor, former director of strategy at this company. The same person you fired for being too assertive for a woman in her position. The same person you bought coffee for yesterday, thinking you were doing charity work." The silence in the room was deafening. Daniel leaned on the table, his legs clearly shaking. "But the most interesting part of our story," Jasmine continued, "is that in the last 6 months, the 15 talented former employees you fired out of prejudice have started their own companies. And do you know who their main clients are?" She clicked on the next slide, an impressive list of companies and contracts. All the contracts Morrison lost. The total value of the business that has migrated to our network, $120 million annually, nearly 3 times Morrison's current revenue. One of the journalists raised his hand. "Miss Taylor, what does this mean for the future of Morrison Enterprises?" Jasmine looked directly at Daniel, who had collapsed in his chair, his face white as a sheet. "It means that arrogance has a price, and that price is total irrelevance." She calmly closed her laptop. "Genesis Capital has no interest in saving Morrison. Our goal today was simply to show you the consequences of building an empire based on prejudice and incompetence, disguised as tradition." Daniel tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. You planned all this." "I did." Jasmine picked up her briefcase. "Every humiliation you put me through, every opportunity you stole, every condescending smile was carefully catalogued and turned into fuel for this moment." The executives looked at each other, clearly realizing that they were witnessing not only the end of a company, but the complete destruction of a man who had confused privilege with competence for too long. "Oh, and Daniel," Jasmine stopped at the door. "Thanks for the coffee yesterday. It was the most expensive $5.80 of your life." As she left, the sound of cell phones ringing simultaneously echoed through the room. Investors, clients, and partners who had watched the live broadcast, courtesy of one of the journalists present, were already cancelling contracts and withdrawing financial contributions. Daniel Morrison, the man who had built an empire on the talent of others, now watched that same empire crumble in real time. And it all started with a simple act of charity, paying for a woman's coffee whom he should never have underestimated. But one question remained that would make all the difference. Would Daniel be able to pick himself up from this devastating fall, or had his arrogance dug a hole too deep for any chance at redemption? What would happen to a man accustomed to power when he discovered he had lost absolutely everything because of $5.80? But one question remained that would make all the difference. Would Daniel be able to pick himself up from this devastating fall, or had his arrogance dug a hole too deep for any chance at redemption? The answer came faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of Jasmine's presentation, Morrison Enterprises' stock plummeted 67%. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced a formal investigation into the company's diversity reporting fraud. 3 major federal contracts worth $89 million were immediately suspended pending review. But the real devastation was personal. Daniel's wife, Margaret Morrison Blackstone, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, filed for divorce exactly 1 week after the boardroom presentation. The divorce papers, leaked to the Wall Street Journal, cited irreconcilable differences stemming from the defendant's documented pattern of professional misconduct and public humiliation of the family name. She took half of everything. The Connecticut estate, the Hamptons house, the yacht, and most critically, the $45 million trust fund that had been backing Morrison Enterprises' operations. Daniel's two children, both attending Harvard Business School, released a joint statement through their attorneys. "We are disappointed and ashamed of our father's documented discriminatory practices and fraudulent business conduct. Effective immediately, we are legally changing our surname to Blackstone and severing all financial and professional ties with Daniel Morrison and Morrison Enterprises." Even his own blood had abandoned him. 6 months after Jasmine's coffee card was declined, Daniel Morrison sat in a studio apartment in Queens, typing his resume on a used Dell laptop he had bought on eBay. The man who once controlled a $400 million empire was now applying for entry-level analyst positions at consulting firms. Daniel Morrison, 49, seeking new opportunities in strategic consulting, he muttered to himself, trying to craft a LinkedIn profile that wouldn't immediately disqualify him. Former CEO with experience in organizational restructuring. He couldn't bring himself to write bankruptcy or federal investigation or systematic fraud. The irony was crushing. The same diversity and inclusion programs he had mocked and undermined were now his only hope for employment. Every job application asked about his commitment to workplace equity. Every interview panel included the very types of people he had spent years systematically excluding. Meanwhile, across town in a penthouse office overlooking Central Park, Jasmine sat behind a glass desk, reviewing Genesis Capital's quarterly numbers. $230 million in annual revenue, 35 employees, clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to federal agencies seeking authentic diversity consulting. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Taylor, Forbes is here for the cover interview." The magazine had chosen her as CEO of the year, the first black woman to receive the title in 15 years. The headline would read, "How an unjust firing created a $230 million empire." What would happen to a man accustomed to power when he discovered he had lost absolutely everything because of $5.80? The story gets even more unbelievable when you hear what Daniel tried to do next. Maratika, what would happen to a man accustomed to power when he discovered he had lost absolutely everything because of $5.80? The answer came in the form of a LinkedIn message that shocked even Jasmine's battle-hardened team. Marcus Chen burst into her office with his laptop, barely containing his laughter. "Jasmine, you have to see this. Daniel Morrison just sent you a direct message." The message read, "Dear Ms. Taylor, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out regarding potential opportunities at Genesis Capital. I have extensive leadership experience in strategic consulting and corporate restructuring, and I believe I could contribute significantly to a company with values as strong as those demonstrated by Genesis. I recognize that I made mistakes in my previous role, and I would welcome the opportunity to learn from an organization that truly understands the importance of diversity and inclusion in modern business. I would be honored to start in any capacity that would allow me to contribute to your mission. Respectfully, Daniel Morrison." The room fell completely silent. "He actually had the audacity to ask you for a job," whispered Patricia Martinez, who had joined the conversation. "Not only that," Marcus scrolled down, "look at his new LinkedIn profile. He's completely rewritten his history. Listen to this. Experienced executive passionate about workplace equity and inclusive leadership, seeking opportunities to contribute to organizations committed to social justice and diverse talent development." Jasmine shook her head in disbelief. The man who destroyed 15 careers out of prejudice, stole ideas, defrauded government contracts, and built his fortune on systematic discrimination is now presenting himself as a diversity advocate. "What was your response?" asked Patricia. Marcus grinned. "I took the liberty of responding on behalf of HR." He pulled up the email. "Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for your interest in Genesis Capital. After careful review of your professional background and documented history, we have determined that your experience does not align with our culture of respect, integrity, and meritocracy. We wish you the best in finding opportunities that better match your qualifications. Sincerely, Genesis Capital Human Resources." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on anyone. Daniel Morrison, who had spent years telling qualified minorities that they weren't a cultural fit, was now being told the exact same thing If you think Daniel Morrison got exactly what he deserved, type justice below. But Jasmine wasn't finished. 3 months later, during her Forbes interview, the journalist asked about the exact moment she decided to destroy Daniel. "It wasn't when he fired me unfairly," she replied calmly. "It wasn't even when I found out he had stolen my strategy. It was when he paid for my coffee, thinking he was doing charity for someone in need." "What do you mean?" That gesture revealed exactly who he was. A man who confused privilege with superiority, who genuinely believed that paying $5, $80 was saving someone less fortunate. Jasmine paused, choosing her words carefully. "He didn't see me as an equal who was temporarily struggling. He saw me as someone who was naturally inferior and deserved his pity." 3 weeks later, the magazine hit the newsstands. The cover photo showed Jasmine in her office with a headline in bold letters, "The 580 Revenge that cost an empire." The real revenge was never about destroying Daniel. It was about building something he could never imagine. What came next would prove that underestimating the right people isn't just unfair. It's the most expensive mistake anyone can make. The real revenge was never about destroying Daniel. It was about building something he could never imagine. Marcus Chen, now CTO of Genesis Capital, walked into Jasmine's office with a mischievous smile. "Jasmine, you have to see this." He showed her his phone. It was a video on LinkedIn of Daniel trying to promote himself for job openings. "Hi, I'm Daniel Morrison, and I'm looking for an opportunity to restart my career in an inclusive and diverse corporate environment." "Inclusive and diverse," Jasmine repeated, laughing. The words he despised most have become his only hope of getting a job. But the true scope of what Jasmine had built was bigger than one man's downfall. Genesis Capital had become more than a consulting firm. It had become a movement. The 15 original employees who had been discriminated against by Daniel were now millionaire entrepreneurs. Each had founded their own companies or divisions, creating a network of businesses that prioritized talent over tradition. Patricia Martinez had launched Martinez Marketing Group, specializing in authentic diversity campaigns. Her first client, a Fortune 100 company seeking to repair its reputation after a discrimination lawsuit. Annual revenue, $45 million. David Park had founded Park Legal Associates, focusing on employment discrimination and corporate compliance. His class action lawsuit against companies with fraudulent diversity reporting had resulted in $340 million in settlements. Personal net worth, $78 million. Marcus Chen had created Chen Tech Solutions, providing cybersecurity and data analytics to corporations seeking to eliminate bias in their hiring algorithms. The company was valued at $120 million, but the ripple effects extended far beyond their personal success. The Genesis model, as business schools were now calling it, had inspired similar networks across the country. Harvard Business School had created a case study. Wharton had invited Jasmine to deliver the commencement address. Most importantly, corporate America was paying attention. The rapid success of Genesis Capital and its network had proven that diverse talent wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the profitable thing to do. Companies that had previously dismissed diversity as political correctness were now desperately recruiting minority talent, terrified of becoming the next Morrison Enterprises. During a panel discussion at the Economic Club of New York, Jasmine was asked about the broader implications of her story. "What we proved," she said to the audience of 500 corporate leaders, "is that when you underestimate people based on their race, gender, or background, you're not just being unfair, you're being stupid. You're throwing away your competitive advantage." She clicked to a slide showing Genesis Capital's client portfolio. Every company here tried to hire Daniel Morrison first. They all chose privilege over performance. Now they're paying 3 times as much for consulting services from the very people they once considered not qualified. The audience was silent. The market doesn't care about your prejudices. It only cares about results. And results come from talent, not from the color of someone's skin or the sound of their last name. 3 years after the coffee shop incident, Morrison Enterprises was officially liquidated. Daniel Morrison, now 52, was working as a junior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm in Newark, making $67,000 a year, less than what Genesis Capital's interns made. But the most rewarding part wasn't Daniel's destruction. It was what Jasmine had built from the ashes. What came next would prove that when you elevate the right people, you don't just change lives, you change entire systems. 5 years after the coffee shop incident, Jasmine stood before the Congressional Committee on Corporate Accountability, testifying about the Genesis model's impact on American business. "Honorable members of Congress," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fundamentally changed an industry. "When I was fired from Morrison Enterprises for being too assertive for a woman in my position, I had a choice. I could disappear quietly, or I could prove that their loss was everyone else's gain." The committee room was packed with reporters, corporate executives, and civil rights leaders. The Genesis Network now represents 847 companies, founded or led by professionals who were previously dismissed, undervalued, or discriminated against. Our collective annual revenue exceeds $12 billion. We employ over 45,000 people, and our client satisfaction ratings are 34% higher than industry standards. She clicked to the next slide, showing a map of the United States dotted with Genesis Network companies. "We've proven that diversity isn't charity, it's competitive advantage. Companies in our network have a 67% higher innovation rate, 23% better employee retention, and 41% faster growth than industry averages." Congressman William Harrison of Texas leaned forward. "Ms. Taylor, critics argue that your model creates reverse discrimination. How do you respond?" Jasmine smiled, the same calm, controlled smile she had worn in Daniel Morrison's boardroom years earlier. "Congressman, Genesis Capital's hiring process is completely merit-based. We hire the best talent, period. The difference is that we don't mistake a Harvard legacy admission for intelligence or a family trust fund for competence. When you remove bias from the equation, you discover that talent has no correlation with privilege." She paused, looking directly at the camera broadcasting the hearing live. Daniel Morrison inherited a company built by 4 generations of his family. In 5 years, he lost everything through arrogance and incompetence. "I started with nothing but a declined credit card and an idea. In 5 years, I built an empire that employs more people than his company ever did." The hearing room erupted in applause. Representative Maria Santos of California asked, "What's next for the Genesis model?" "Education," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "We're launching the Genesis Institute, a business school specifically designed to identify and develop talent that traditional institutions overlook. Our first class of 500 students will graduate next year, and they're already being recruited by Fortune 500 companies." As she testified, Daniel Morrison sat in his studio apartment in Queens, watching the hearing on a laptop with a cracked screen. He had aged terribly. Grey hair thinned to almost nothing, deep lines around his eyes, the posture of a man who had been thoroughly defeated. On his coffee table sat a stack of rejection letters. "McKinsey, thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. Bain, your background doesn't align with our current needs. Boston Consulting Group, we appreciate your application but have selected more suitable candidates." Every major consulting firm had turned him down. The industry whispered that he was toxic, a liability that could cost them clients and reputation. Meanwhile, the former Morrison Enterprises building had been converted into the Genesis Institute's flagship campus. Where Daniel once held meetings to discuss cultural fit, students from every background imaginable now studied advanced business strategy. That night, Jasmine passed by the same coffee shop where it had all begun. The same cashier was still working there, and he recognized her immediately from the magazine covers and news interviews. What happened next would complete the circle in the most beautiful way possible. That night, Jasmine passed by the same coffee shop where it had all begun. The same cashier was still working there, and he recognized her immediately from the magazine covers and news interviews. "Ms. Taylor, it's an honor to have you here," he said, clearly impressed. "I remember you from before you became famous." She ordered her usual, a large latte with an extra shot. When it came time to pay, she handed him a black American Express Centurion card with no spending limit. "Approved," the cashier announced, smiling. Jasmine took her coffee and looked around. The coffee shop had changed too. The walls were covered with news articles about successful entrepreneurs, diversity in business, and corporate accountability. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Where great stories begin." There were no more arrogant executives paying for other people's drinks out of pity. There was no more humiliation disguised as charity. There was just a black woman, CEO of a $400 million company, proving every day that the best revenge isn't getting back at those who hurt you. It's rising so high, they can't reach you. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Daniel just applied to be a barista at 3 different Starbucks locations. All 3 turned him down for lacking customer service experience. Jasmine laughed softly. The man who once controlled hundreds of millions of dollars couldn't even get hired to make coffee. But as she walked toward her Tesla Model S, Jasmine felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction at Daniel's suffering, but peace at her own success. If this story of turning humiliation into empire building inspired you, type inspired below. 6 months later, Jasmine received an unexpected visitor at her office. Amanda Foster, Daniel's former secretary, now worked as Genesis Capital's Director of Strategic Communications. She knocked on the door with an unusual expression. "Jasmine, you're not going to believe this. Daniel Morrison is outside. He says he wants to apologize." Jasmine looked up from her quarterly review documents. "Send him in." Daniel entered the office, a shadow of his former self. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a wrinkled button-down shirt and discount store slacks. His confidence had been completely stripped away, leaving behind a broken man who looked older than his 54 years. "Jasmine," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I wanted to say I'm sorry." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Daniel." He sat carefully, as if afraid the chair might break under his weight. "I know this doesn't change anything," he continued, staring at his hands. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused to your career, to the other people I fired, to the company my family built for 4 generations. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I was, what I did, and why I lost everything." Jasmine studied his face. There was no trace of the arrogant CEO who had paid for her coffee 5 years earlier. This was a man who had been completely humbled by the consequences of his own actions. "The coffee," he said suddenly. "That stupid $5.80 coffee. I thought I was being generous, but I was really being condescending. I saw you as someone beneath me, someone who needed my charity. I never saw you as an equal, much less as someone who was smarter, more capable, more deserving of success than I was." Jasmine leaned back in her chair. "And now? Now I know that everything I achieved was built on other people's work. The strategies, the innovations, the successes, none of it was really mine. I was just the person taking credit." He looked up at her for the first time. "You deserved everything you've built, and I deserved everything I lost." The office was silent for a long moment. "Daniel," Jasmine said finally, "I accept your apology. Not because it changes the past, but because it proves that even someone like you can learn from their mistakes." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. "I won't offer you a job. I won't help you rebuild your career. But I will say this. The fact that you came here today, that you acknowledged what you did wrong, that you're not making excuses or blaming others, that's the first step toward becoming the person you should have been all along." Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Jasmine, for the lesson and for proving that justice doesn't always come from the courts or the government. Sometimes it comes from people who refuse to let their potential be defined by other people's prejudices." As he left, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a declined coffee card to a business empire that employed thousands and had changed an entire industry. The best revenge, she realized, wasn't destroying Daniel Morrison. It was building something so successful, so impactful, so undeniably valuable that no one could ever again question whether she belonged at the top. If this story has inspired you to never settle for less than you deserve, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that underestimating the right people isn't just unfair, it's the most expensive mistake anyone can make. Because while some pay for coffee out of pity, others build empires out of justice.